All right, so it's preparing the live stream, so we'll kind of be on there, but I'm sharing screen with my little presentation. Maybe it went away. All right, so it's there we go. Hi, MJC and our greater Modesto community. I'd like to welcome you guys to Science Colloquium today. We are going to start at 3:15, so right on time. So if you're here a little early, just be patient. We're going to let people join us here in our virtual lecture hall. Today we'll have Meg Kummerow, I think I just messed it up again, the CFO from Fly the Farm, and she's going to talk about closing the gap with drones and looking at drones and drone applications for agriculture. And Fly the Farm is a drone technology company working to improve technology available to agriculture. And this is kind of exciting because Ms. Kummerow is an advocate for sustainability in agriculture and will discuss how technology can make a significant improvement to agricultural systems. I also want to tell you about 2 weeks from now, on April 7th, we are going to welcome our own Derek Madden, MJC biology professor. He's going to talk about science and art of yoga and the monkey-human connection. And he's going to discuss his research on monkey arthritis and how that led him to study yoga as a scientist. So I hope you'll also come back in 2 weeks and join us for that presentation. And we're at 3:14. So Troy, right at 3:15, you can kind of take it away.
Sounds good. I'll go ahead and I've got a short introduction for her, and then we'll turn it over to Meg Kummerow. And we are going to just absolutely butcher your last name. I apologize. I told you, I warned you ahead of time, though. I can do that. I can look at it, and I will absolutely butcher that last name. But Meg, thank you for joining us. It is 3:15, so I'm going to go ahead and introduce Meg to you today. Meg is the founder and owner of Fly the Farm, an agricultural-focused drone reselling business, which is based in Darling Downs in Queensland, Australia. So she's coming to us live today from Australia. You'll have to forgive her. It is 8 o'clock in the morning over there on Thursday morning. So she's got a head start on us a little bit there. Meg uses her understanding of agriculture to help farmers and others involved in agriculture to help make good decisions when it comes to bringing drones onto their farm. Meg's also involved with the Australian grain industry through her work with the Grain Research Foundation Limited and also the Australian Summer Grain Conference. Meg and her family live on a grain farm, which is also where her business is located. She's interested in working to improve regulations surrounding drone use in agriculture. We are pleased to have with us from Australia this morning, tonight our time, this morning your time. But Meg, thank you for joining us and taking some time to share some of your insight with us today.
Yeah, look, and thanks so much for the invitation. Now, I apologize in advance. I mean, it's Meg Kummerow, but, you know, Kummerow, whatever, it's all good. So, yeah, I obviously speak Australian. So if there's a term or a phrase that I use that makes little to no sense, just write it down or pop it in the questions and we can straighten it all up later. So yeah, I'm going to get started and with my presentation. Fair warning, there are some YouTube videos in here. A means I have to talk less, which is good for me, but also, you know, there's so much interesting stuff happening out in the drone industry that, you know, I really wanted to share what other people are doing because that's just how I roll. You know, I like to bring everyone together to get good outcomes. So bear with me while I get going with this. Radio. So yeah, and thanks, Troy, for coming up with the closing the gap with drones topic for me. That was a really good one. I like being given a really narrow thing to talk about. Otherwise, I could go on and on forever. So yeah, closing the gap with drones. We'll be looking at that. We'll be looking at a few different things throughout our time. So a little bit about me to, I guess, give you a bit of background about why I do what I do. So I grew up on a beef cattle property about 4 hours away from where I live now. I attended a college called Dalby Agricultural College, where I got an advanced diploma in agriculture, rural business management, and a diploma in business administration. I met and married a cotton farmer, and his parents retired and sold the farm back in 2013. So that was a pretty major shift for us. We thought we were going to be farming for the rest of our lives, and that didn't happen. So we then had to go out and look for other things to do. I then stepped out into work in the grains industry, and through the Australian Summer Grains Conference in 2016, came across had a realization that there was nobody out there selling drones who had an understanding of farmers and spoke their language. So I've always loved technology. So I saw that there was a spot for somebody with that agricultural background to really get in and help farmers when they're looking to bring drones onto their farm, but also third-party service providers, that they had someone to bounce ideas off about what they were looking to do. So yeah, the drones kind of bring my two loves of agriculture and technology together. Another thing I'm really passionate about is helping rural kids get access to robotics, because they'll be the future of what happens on farms. So we're doing a little bit of stuff in schools with drones and robotics. And I guess I have a collaborative approach to building the ag drone industry, and it probably comes from my work within the non-for-profit agricultural scene. I like to bring people together to make sure that things are getting developed the way that they need to for industry. Another thing I believe is that drones aren't always the answer. There's some really great other technology out there, like satellites, which are providing really, really great insights into what happens on farm and can really provide really good data to farmers for them to making decisions. And at the end of the day, everything I do is about my farmer clients and for the agricultural industry. So this presentation is a bit of a playlist of some of the people who I really respect in the industry, who are doing some really cool stuff. And so, there are a few YouTube videos that I'll be sharing, hopefully, if our technology behaves itself. But that's me. So today, we're going to be looking at what is closing the gap. And when I think of closing the gap for farmers, for farmers to uptake technology, they need to see a productive outcome and a profitable outcome, but more and more they're looking to a sustainable outcome as well. So in the area where I live, it's been really, really dry. Water has been a limiting factor when it comes to growing anything. So 2019 was one of the driest years on record, and last year wasn't that much better. We grew dryland corn so we're just coming out of summer, and some of the crop we never got anything off because of the lack of rain. So it's about making the most of what you have to ensure that the farm is sustainable, but also the industry and the environment is looked after as well. So as we go through this presentation, you'll see that what people are working on fit under those three topics: productivity, profitability, and sustainability. So we're going to be looking at three different areas today. So the first being precision agriculture. So that can be anything from cropping all the way through to tree crops, which I think is in your area. Obviously where I am, it's broadacre, corn, cotton, and those kinds of crops. But along the coast, it might be cane. And there's also a lot of horticulture that happens, and tree crops from almonds down south to tea tree and things like that. Livestock and animals. So obviously Australia is a very vast country with a lot of land. A lot of that is under livestock production, but also there's a lot happening with wild animals and monitoring. And then the last is environment. So we'll be having a bit of a look at a few of those things. So drones in precision agriculture, where are they fitting? I say data is gold, so it doesn't matter what you do. And every day on a farm, you're creating data. Whether you're on a tractor doing planting, or if you're doing a spray, if you're spraying for insects or weeds, that's all data, and that can all be used to improve the system. And so with precision agriculture, what we're looking is trying to feed that data in to help improve what's happening on farm and reduce costs, but also reduce impact on the environment. So things that we can affect using drones is we can use NDVI imagery to identify areas of the crop that require more fertilizer or less fertilizer, or maybe even none at all. If there's already plenty of nutrition in the soil, then you might not need to apply anything. Herbicides, so I guess the old way of doing it was if you went out and sprayed, it was a broad acre application. You'd spray a whole paddock. Whereas now we can use drones and satellite to identify areas where there are weeds in a crop and just spray that little area. So if it's a metre by a metre, and I apologise, I talk in metres and things like that, degrees centigrade and all of those things, and I'm not very good at converting. So you can be really, really targeted on what you apply, when and where. And it's a big saving on cost, so that comes to your profitability side of things, but also it's an environmental saving. So obviously, not where I live, but closer to the coast, anything that gets applied gets washed out into the ocean and into the Great Barrier Reef. So they're looking at really, what can they do to reduce anything that gets washed out and may negatively affect the reef. And then the last one is soil and water. So drones and other technologies such as EM surveys, soil sampling, soil water monitoring can also give a lot of information to farmers on what's happening with soil, and so not wasting water to ensure that we're really, really making the most of what is a limited resource, particularly here in Australia in certain areas. And it's been extremely dry, as I've said, for quite a couple of years. So we're really trying to really get the most out of the limited amount that we've been getting. You can use drones to assist irrigation scheduling, say in combining with say some soil monitors that are in the soil, and you can pick up leaks. So if there's a hole in a pipe somewhere, you can identify it reasonably quickly. So the first video is courtesy of World of Drones and Robotics Congress. So it's a congress or that happens in Brisbane it's in August this year. And it's a really, really great event to go to. It has an online portion. So if drones are your thing, then you might like to get on and watch that in conjunction with Department of Ag and Primary Industries here in Queensland. And so Marcus Bulstrode is Extension Officer up in Far North Queensland, working a lot with cane, and he has done a lot of work using drones to help the cane farmers up there reduce their inputs into the farm, and therefore, improving what happens and what flows out to the reef. So bear with me while I try and get this video to play. Fingers crossed, it worked for us before, Troy, so hopefully it works for us again. Rightio.
My name is Marcus Bulstrode and I work for the Queensland Department of Agriculture and Fisheries. I'm working with growers to better understand their farm, taking it from managing the farm as a big single unit to reducing it down and managing it as separate small management units. This could be an area of just a few square metres, or it might be an area of a few hundred metres. It's a very exciting time to be in agriculture. New technologies such as drones are providing a whole range of new tools for us to be able to better manage farms. What we actually do with the drone, we'll put the drone up in the air, we'll fly over the crop. That might be at 100 metres or so. The drone is looking down the whole time with its sensor, and it's basically taking high resolution images of the crop. Drones come with a range of sensors these days. The typical one that I would use would be just an RGB, a red, green, blue sensor, so if you like a standard camera. But we also have multispectral cameras and thermal cameras. So we have some very specific sensors that we can tune to identify the character that we're interested in. I then go back to the office and I can process those images and start to unlock where the areas of difference are across the paddock. I've stitched together all of the images, and now I have a single orthomosaic high resolution image of the paddock. If we look over here where there is no vegetation, we actually can't really see much going on at all. What we need is what we have here, where we've got a crop. Suddenly we can see all sorts of variability, and it's the crop that actually shows us the difference in the growing conditions, and that's a very important aspect of it. Ideally, the crop needs to be a bit over 1 metre high. I need to get enough leaf matter to be able to be seen by the drone clearly above it. In some cases, it's much easier to visualise the problem that we have using a 3D model, but I can zoom in and have a look around to see, okay, what did it actually look like on the ground? What was the effect that the growing conditions were having on the cane? In a 3D perspective, it's actually very easy to see the difference in the growing conditions. I can see the area that I'm particularly interested in. If we look back up here, another area where it's doing very poorly compared to relatively even the rest of the block. So I can zoom right in on that area and have a much closer look to see, yep, that's very poor cane through here. There's all sorts of weeds that have dried off. That's the area that I want to be able to go back into that paddock and see what's going on. I can run it through a couple of different algorithms here, a colour-coded elevation model of the paddock, blue being low, red being high, and we can see that this strip where the cane is not doing well is lower and much more open. So this is exactly the sort of area that I would then go into the paddock and start trying to work out why, and can I actually change that zone to make it better for the sugarcane. What I can do is take a marker, put that marker into this image. That marker is now a geo-referenced point that I can go back to with another device such as an iPad. I can walk back into this paddock and stand at that precise point and know that I'm in the middle of the area that I'm concerned about and start to do some analysis to work out, okay, how can I fix it? And this is exactly the sort of thing that I would say to myself, I need to do some soil sampling, some testing of that area to see why is the cane not doing well. So using the drone mapping, I've been able to identify a part in the paddock where the cane was not doing well. I've extracted a soil core from this zone. I'll be able to analyse this soil core and start to understand what the limiting conditions may be for crop growth. Up here where the crop's growing, we've got roots, got organic matter, things that we need to have. We start to get a colour change as we come down through the soil profile. We've got now an absence of roots. There's nothing growing down into this part of the soil. And then when we get right down here, we've actually got, that's virtually beach sand. There's just nothing there at all. No clay, no organic matter, so not a good growing medium and something that would be needing to be treated to be able to grow cane properly. And in many cases, I should be able to improve this area to make the crop grow better. Remember that previously this paddock would be managed as one unit. It gets the same fertiliser, the same cultivation, everything is put on identically across the whole paddock. And yet we know that there's actually different growing zones. Some areas grow better cane, some areas grow poorer cane. Utilising the drone technology, we're able to target those areas of difference. We can then start to manage them separately. So for example, with this farm here, we're actually trialling some different techniques to improve the soil in those poor growing areas. We're going to actually add some organic matter and some clay and see whether we can increase the water holding capacity and also the nutrient holding capacity of these soils. The great thing with drone technology is it provides the base maps for other precision equipment. For example, variable rate fertiliser boxes, and what they require is relevant mapping products that can go into the tractor. We've got a smart implement on the back of the machine and it can alter its fertiliser rate within the paddock as it's going along. So the best outcome is for the crop to take up the nutrients that we're applying. We don't want nutrients leaving the paddock. The grower doesn't want nutrients leaving the paddock heading out to the Great Barrier Reef. We want the crop to use them and to grow a large crop. The same thing applies to weed management, that typically across a paddock we've got areas that produce more weeds and some areas that might produce fewer weeds. So if we're putting out herbicide, we might want to put it out particularly targeting those zones of high weed load, whereas the areas that don't have weeds, we might say to ourselves, well, I don't need to put any herbicide out. There are significant efficiency gains for both the grower and also for the natural environment. The other great thing with the drone mapping is that we can compare it to other mapping systems. For example, EMI, which is electromagnetic induction, where we actually can measure the differences in the soil properties. We can now compare that to the crop yield above those soil differences and to see how well they match together. There are many uses for drone mapping for precision agriculture. One example here is flow mapping. We can actually create the surface water flow model for the land that we're interested in. So that means that we can design drainage networks, all sorts of other earthworks based around the drone mapping. In the near future, I think some of the biggest developments are going to be in AI, so artificial intelligence. For example, automated weed recognition, where I can fly the paddock, put the data set through an AI program, and it will automatically find the character that I'm interested in. It might be a particular weed, and it will identify how much of the weed is in the paddock and whereabouts it is located. The great thing with drone technology is that it is actually accessible to growers. The machines are quite advanced, quite technical, but they've reached the point that they're almost consumer level these days. So a grower can go out, buy a machine, get a bit of advice on what he may want to be doing with the mapping side of things, but basically a grower can go out and do his own crop mapping and then engage with an agronomist or an advisor to understand those different zones. I've been flying farms for about the last 5 years, and what has really struck me has been the amount of variability that there is across the growing regions. At first we used to think that farms were fairly even, but the drone mapping has revealed that most farms have a high level of variability. We just didn't know it before. We now have a tool where we can easily identify that variability and set about doing something about it.
So you can see, that they're doing some really interesting work, and it's very easily transferable across to other industries as well. I think in the area where you live, there's a lot of tree crops, and so it's really, really easy to see where you could put a drone over and identify where there might be disease in a crop, and then just instead of going out and treating every tree within the orchard, just treat the ones that are showing symptoms of ill health, and a lot of that can be picked up with these end-of-eye cameras. They can see what we can't. So when trees get sick, they reflect light differently to, and any plant reflect light differently to a healthy plant. So using that information to go out and be really targeted, and it's not just about improving the bottom line for the farmer. It's about being really, really targeted and making sure that we're not overusing chemical, because at some point in the future, we may not have access to everything that we have access to in the way of chemistry. So let's keep going. Let's see if I can get started again. Radio. So the next topic or area within ag that we're going to look at is drones in livestock and animal monitoring. So in Australia, we have some really large land holdings when it comes to say cattle stations or ranches. I've got to remember to put it into American terminology. They're vast areas of land. I mean, they'll go out and do a water run every day, and it could take them 6 hours to drive around and check troughs to make sure that cattle have water to drink, and things like that. A lot of farmers are using them to find livestock before they go mustering. So on really large properties, they might use a helicopter, but that's getting really expensive to run choppers. So they can use a drone in smaller holdings to find out where the cattle are before they put somebody out on a horse or a bike, it's a safety thing. So there are a lot of accidents that happen on farms with horses and bikes. Here in Australia, we no longer have access to four-wheeler motorbikes. They're no longer being sold because of safety. There's been so many rollovers. So farmers are really looking for ways to be more efficient and safe, making sure that their staff and their family members are safe. Tracking, there's a lot of work being done in tracking wildlife. So, and we'll get onto this in the next section as well, which is environment. But after the bushfires here in 2019 and 2020, there was vast amounts of land that were affected and animals that had been injured. And they used drones with thermal cameras on them to go and find out where these animals were and rescue any animals that needed help, but also do counts of what livestock or what wildlife were left in those areas and had moved back in after the fires had gone through, as well as health. So I haven't been able to find a good video on the health side, but say they can use drones with, say, thermal technology to pick up animals that are sick in a paddock or in a feedlot environment. And then one of the videos that we're going to look at today as well is using long-range drones to fly around and do these water checks that a person used to have to drive around in a truck, we call it a ute, around a farm and check water. So we've got a couple of good videos coming up. One is on how drones are being used in wildlife monitoring, but this can also be transferred into monitoring cattle as well. So they're using the same technology this RFID technology. So here in Australia, all of our cattle have RFID ear tags in. It's called the National Livestock Identification Scheme. And every animal is individually tagged. And so they can follow this animal all the way through from birth through and essentially until they get on your plate. And you're using these drones with RFID scanners to make sure that cattle are in a paddock where they're meant to be, which is pretty mind-blowing. So there's three videos coming up. Two are from wildlife drones. So Debbie Saunders, she's doing some pretty amazing things, with the wildlife monitoring, but also with livestock. And then so there's two videos for her. And then one is Sunbirds, which is a large fixed wing drone, solar powered, that can fly for 6 hours. And they're using this drone to go out and monitor water points. So again, fingers crossed these work. Helps if I press play.
So our system enables a huge saving in time and effort that will benefit anyone who needs to track animal movements using a radio tag. By tracking with the drone, you're making a high point wherever you are, and so you're maximising the line of sight with the tags. So no matter how convoluted the landscape might be, the drone can pick it up, whereas on the ground, you might not pick it up at all. So instead of spending your entire day, you can spend 1 to 2 hours by just simply putting the drone up and slowly rotating it and picking up those signals. And if you don't need any more information, your whole day is done. So there's just huge benefits for people who want to do tracking this way.
So you can see, putting something like the RFID scanner onto a drone. I mean, in the past, they would walk around and use the RFID scanner to try and identify where animals were, but to put it on a drone gives them a much greater capability of covering greater areas of land, and you could see that a lot of that country was really hilly, and so being able to put a drone up higher than the hills, and that gives them a much greater coverage. So it's pretty cool that they can do that. And so this is some of the work that Debbie has been doing in the past 12 months. yeah, they're working on some really, really cool stuff. And I'm always excited to see what Debbie's working on and to catch up with her when we go to conferences and things, because yeah, she's always working on something new. And so if any of these things interest you, don't hesitate to reach out and chat to these people, because that's what drives them, is hearing other people's thoughts and being in contact and say, I really like what you're doing. What can happen in my part of the world. So now we're going to look at the Sunbird. So this is this fixed wing solar powered drone, and what they're doing on large cattle stations or ranches here in Australia. So again, yeah, I really like the stuff. So they are French, Sunbirds are a French-based company, and they developed this solar-powered fixed-wing drone. They're like, right, well, where can we go to test it? And decided that Australia, with its vast areas of uninhabited land, essentially, it was a really great place. And yeah, I think they're also doing some work in Africa potentially as well. But you can see, one of the limiting factors that we have with the drones is battery life. So when you're out flying a quadcopter, I mean, if you can get 30 minutes, out of the consumer grade stuff, then you're doing really well. But there's so much more that can happen once we have increased flight times. So, these new technologies, whether it's solar powered, there's hydrogen powered drones coming through, and hybrid drones. There's some really, really cool technology coming through the pipeline that will make really, really big impacts, not just on agriculture with drones, but every industry. So our next section is environmental management. And again, in 2019 and 20, as we said, there was some devastating bushfires, not just in Australia, but also in areas of the US. And so there's, looks like I might not have, oh no, it is, that's all right. I thought I might have picked up the wrong slide here, but that's all good. Yeah, so they're using drones to revegetate areas, which is mind-boggling. So when you think of, people planting trees and using machines to plant trees, like tractors, is still going to be a really important part of revegetating these areas. But there's a lot of country that is inaccessible to those machines, and so they've developed these drones that can fly over and throw at these seed pods that can put trees back into where they've all been devastated. So again, identifying, monitoring animals after these natural disasters, but they're also being used to monitor poaching activities. So particularly in Africa, there's a lot of obviously poaching that happens, and there's groups using the drones to track where poachers are and go out and stop the activity before it happens. Modeling, so using drones to monitor not just the land, but also the coastal environments, as well as coral reefs. There's a lot of work being done in those areas by some really, really amazing scientists. And then the revegetation, and I think this is what I was saying, this is what they're doing is really, really cool. They can get out and cover pretty large areas of land in a reasonably short amount of time without having to put anybody in a dangerous situation on the sides of cliffs or really steep hilly country. So I think it's a really, really great use of drones. So we're doing 2 videos here. One is Air Seed Technologies and the work that they're doing to revegetate bushland here in Australia following the fires last year, as well as Dr. Kath from World of Drones and Robotics Congress. So she'll be talking more on the coastal management side of things. Just bear with me while we get this going again. Oops, sorry.
Australia is a global deforestation hotspot and the bushfires killed hundreds of millions of trees. We have to do everything we can to help grow more forests. That's why we need to innovate, such as with drones, to help grow more forests more quickly.
Air Seed's process is a 4-step process, and it's understanding the ground, understanding the soil, and understanding what species we should be planting in what locations, and we do that with drones and with science. Second phase is manufacturing seed pods, and the seed pod is the delivery vessel that carries the seeds from the drones into the ground. The third stage is planting, so that's the big drones that fly autonomously. They're out there planting different types of seeds. And then the fourth phase is probably one of the most important phases, and that's monitoring and what we call proactive protection. Once we've planted, it's getting out there, flying the drones, using AI to identify species that have been successful in establishing, and then being involved in that project for X amount of time post-planting to ensure its success. The drone that we've been using today, it can plant up to 40,000 seed pods per day in an 8-hour working shift, so it's around about 10 minutes of flight time to plant up to 1,000 seed pods. Having the opportunity to get out there in scale and really start making a difference within a 6-week period post-bushfire is a really important thing. Terrain is sometimes difficult for people to get to. The drones obviously can tackle that problem with no issue. So really giving access to people to get out there and start restoring lands much faster and much cheaper. We don't believe that this technology is going to replace manual planting. That's always going to be part of the solution, but it is going to be a tool in the arsenal to combat biodiversity loss and climate change.
A very big thank you to the thousands of people around the world who donated to the Australian Wildlife and Nature Recovery Fund that is allowing us to trial the use of drones to create more habitat for koalas and wildlife. Thank you.
So as you can see, I mean, that is really, really amazing technology. I guess you would want to be really targeted in doing it before a rainfall event so that when you plant those seeds, that there's moisture there for them to come up and to get going. But I think it's really critical that, you know, these technologies are used when they can. And our last video for today, we're there just about, is from Dr. Kath and what the work that they're doing on the coast with drones.
So as we face a world where climate change is making our storms bigger, scarier, less predictable, how do we protect ourselves in our coastal areas? Well, drones are a really great way to capture high-resolution geospatial imagery of our coastal zones, the zones that are incredibly important for our water catchments, our coral reefs, our fisheries, and our tourism, and in fact, just where people live. Human beings have always loved to live near water, and the coast, in beautiful places like Australia, is certainly no exception to that. But unfortunately, what we're finding is, unless we are able to predict a little better how large storms are going to affect our coastlines, more and more houses are going to end up going for a permanent swim. So how are drones being used around ideas of measuring coastal erosion to help us protect our assets or evacuate people from vulnerable coastal zones? Well, drones are being used immediately after events, so we're getting more of an understanding of that initial hit of how movement is happening in our coastal zones. Drones can be flown on a really frequent basis. If you have a drone that can fly, say, 10 kilometers of beach every day, you can build up a really beautiful map and model of how that beach is actually behaving under normal conditions. This can allow you to put that data into the models around storm prediction to see what would happen if the wave height was a bit higher, if the waves were a bit more frequent, if there was a change in how much precipitation, how much rain was actually coming down a river catchment at the same time, if it was high tide. People have been using drones to actually flood risk map. And what happened originally was people were using satellite data or manned aircraft data and saying, say, to house A, you're in a flood zone, therefore you can't get flood insurance or your premium is going to be very, very high. And house B, they would say, oh, you're not in a flood zone, so you can get flood insurance and your premiums are not going to be so high. When they started flying drones around, a lot of the time they realized that they thought that house A was in a flood zone. It actually wasn't. And when they thought house B was not in a flood zone, it actually was. So with more accurate data, we're able to model more, which means we are actually able to understand risk better. And if the time is not now, then when? We need to get better at understanding how our river systems and how our coastal systems are going to cope with climate change, with larger storms, with more drought and more flood. And drones can be a perfect data platform for this kind of survey.
Thanks, Dr. Kath. So yeah, again, some really, really interesting things happening in that space. And I don't think it matters what industry that you're involved in. There is a space for drones, whether that's construction, environmental management. It's not just agriculture. I mean, there are so many fits for drones. And, if technology and your industry is what interests you, and then drones are a really good place to start. But I come from this from an agricultural point of view. I mean, the drone is essentially just a tractor. What goes on it is the important thing. So the camera, different sensors. The drone's just a platform to get the data from whatever attaches to it. So I think we're doing pretty good on time. Just a couple more things. Bear with me. So where do I fit in all of this? And I think there's a lot of space for a lot of people who can use their knowledge to, I guess, connect people. So I help farmers. I help connect with farmers to help them understand if a drone will suit their needs. So I seem to turn more people away from drones than get them into the drone industry, because a drone isn't always the answer. So I use my background in agriculture to help farmers make good decisions if they do bring a drone onto their farm. Another thing I do is connect with regulators. So there's a lot of regulations surrounding the use of drones, from your FAA over in the States to our CASA. So that, there's licensing rules that we need to consider. I'm doing a lot of work with drone spraying here in Australia, and so there's a lot. Each state has its own regulations when it comes to, if farmers can use drones on their farm, and if they do, what they need to go through in order to get a license to have a spray drone and to be putting out any kind of chemical or fertilizer onto their farm. So, for instance, in Victoria, up until middle of December, you couldn't spray anything with drones apart from those big Yamaha RMAX helicopters. So there was several industry organisations, individual businesses who all kind of worked together to get those regulations changed to make it to make a pathway for people to use spray drones in that state, as well as a sounding board. So again, it all comes back to this bridging the gap. So bridging the gap between agriculture and the drone industry and the regulators. So that's pretty much me. They're my details. If you ever have any questions about anything, that's what I'm here for. Happy to bounce ideas off. But I guess now we're at the Q&A part, Troy and Elizabeth.
Perfect. Thanks again for that information. That was great information. Very, very diverse in terms of, applicable information that we can use here, even in the States. So we appreciate that information and your use of technology. I think especially when we think about the wildfires in California, I think your information that you shared with us is pretty invaluable. So let me look and see what we have for questions. I got a question here from Andrew that he's wondering if drones can be used for pest management and or removal.
Yeah, so there has been some work done here in Australia for feral animals. So we have issues with wild dogs and wild pigs. So what they did was they had a drone, a multi-rotor drone with thermal cameras on it, and they would fly over the areas where they had a fair idea that these feral animals were in, and they could use the thermal camera to identify where they were. And then in the case of feral pigs, I mean, they do pretty significant damage to the environment, but also crops. And so they then got a helicopter in with a fellow, and they controlled the pigs. So it can be, absolutely can be done. And there are people out there doing it.
Very cool. Thank you. Got another one from Darwin and McGinnis here. What's the average range for drone use on a farm? I'm guessing in terms of, the number of hours. I know we heard a few things on there, like 6 hours and things like that, but what's kind of the average?
Yeah, so I guess these days they're getting a better and better range. So, anywhere up to, again, I'm going to work in kilometres. So, 5 kilometres, whatever that is in miles, or, some of them are even further. But I guess, again, coming back to limiting factors, it comes back to regulations. So I'm not 100% clear on what FAA regulations are, but here in Australia, unless you have a beyond visual line of sight license or an EVLOS, which is extended visual line of sight, you can't fly your drone beyond what you can see. And so you think of something like a Mavic, which is, kind of, I know that's not a very good description, but, it's not, they're not a huge drone. And just how far you can see that, that could be, again, 500 meters. So, whatever that is in, over there. So it's not far. And so that is one of the real limiting factors when it comes to using drones on farms. And so it's about being smart about how to use it. So I say if people are wanting to find cattle in a paddock, then, to get up on a high area, if it's so undulating, get up on a high area and have a bit of a scout around. But it would be great in the future to see some regulation come through that makes it easier for, I guess, and I'm coming from an ag background, for farmers to use drones in a more extended area over their property, because, there's also, while we have to be aware of manned aircraft and not impacting, a plane with somebody in it or multiple people in it, for the most part, particularly out in, the really remote areas of Australia, they're not going to have an aircraft come over at 400 feet. They're going to be at 40,000 feet flying over. So, there's a bit more space for them to do a bit more out in those more remote areas. But yeah, I mean, they have a reasonable distance that they can go away, these modern drones, but regulation restricts just how much we can do.
Yeah, that sounds pretty similar to what we have going on in the United States as well too. So thank you for that. Let's see. I got a couple of questions in here from Jeannie, like in terms of the seed capsules. We saw the injection of those seed capsules. Kind of curious about what the make is of those, what the makeup is of those that allows them to be shot out and then also planted.
Yeah, so I'm not 100% certain, but I would assume that it would be some type of clay-based bioencapsulation with nutrients that the trees would also need to get a good start in life. And again, they would have to be not planting it necessarily into dry soil, or if they are planting it into dry, then making sure that there's a rain event coming in afterwards, because I mean, essentially, if it's dry, they can sit around for unlimited amount of time. But if they were to plant it into a little bit of moisture and the seed sprouts and gets a bit of a start, and then there's no more water come through, then that's a waste. So yeah, I'd say they'd have a bit of clay in it for that moisture. There's a bit of retained moisture once it opens up and everything starts growing.
Yeah, thank you. I got a couple questions here that kind of group together, I think, and maybe you can kind of add a little bit to this in terms of the stitching of the images together, and also the that 3D imaging that was shown on there. I've seen personally, and we do a little bit at MJC with drones and work with them. I've seen a little bit of the stitching of that together, but I haven't seen the 3D work, and that was pretty amazing. And so we've got a question in here about how all of that kind of stitches together and the programs that people are using for that.
Yeah, so I'd say with what they were using there was probably something like Pix4D, which is they do just take, it's just a standard image, and just the way that it stitches together gives you that 3D type information. So another way of doing it is with LiDAR, but that is terribly expensive. And I think unless you're doing research, then it's probably out of, or doing really specialized stuff in mines, then LiDAR is a little bit out of the question. But yeah, it's surprising what you can do with the likes of, say, Pix4D, probably, and I never get this acronym right, UGCS, I think is another platform that you can use for stitching. But yeah, and, I guess with Pix4Ds, you can probably try and, if you're using a multi-spectral camera, is mix a bit of that 3D in with the plant health stuff. So that's pretty cool as well.
I got a question here about to fly in Australia, and I think you kind of answered this already, but do you actually have a pilot's license program for drones and drone technology?
Yeah, so here in Australia, we are pretty lucky. Back in 2016, in September, they changed some of the regulations. So you can fly an under 2 kilo drone without requiring a remote pilot's license, which is like your 107 over there. So an under 2 kilo drone looks like anything smaller than a Phantom, essentially, is under 2 kilos. And then once you get over that 2 kilos, then you go and do your REPL or your 107 over there. So I guess, yeah, I mean, that's really opened up the industry. And for agriculture, actually, it's even better. So if you're flying a drone over your own farm, you can fly up to a 25 kilo drone without requiring a license, which is, I mean, a 25 kilo drone is huge. Like that's an Agras MG series. I mean, they're under 25 kilos. So that's a spray drone. But then, that side of things is then where it gets a little bit difficult, in that some states require us to, if you're going to have a spray drone spraying out stuff, you need to have the full what they call the REOC, which is a commercial license to fly. So it's a little bit different here in Australia to the States, but yeah, I guess there's, I guess when it comes to the standard things like, not flying above 400 feet, flying visual line of sight, all those kinds of things are pretty much the same.
Now, in addition to that, if you're flying something and you're delivering any sort of pesticides, you guys have pesticide regulations at applicator license?
Yeah. So each state has their own pesticides management, where you have to have a license, and you have to have had certifications on certain things, such as handling and storing chemical and things like that.
Got a question here from Noah. He's wondering if you know, I'm not sure what your tree crops are, if you have much for tree crops, or what direction you go with them. But do you know of any applications where you're using drones?
Yeah, so I've got a client down in New South Wales who's using spray drones to, he's a tea tree farmer. So he's using spray drones on his tea tree farm to, cool. I guess, to combat fungal disease, I think. And also they get an insect. And so he's not organic per se, but he uses, he kind of follows organic principles, and using, not wanting to, I guess, broadacre, or everything around. He's, being really targeted. And plus, they get enormous amounts of rain down there, like 500, like half a metre of rain. They'll get in a week, and so then they can't get onto their paddocks then. So using a drone is really, it's a way they can still get out and put stuff over when they need to, without, I guess, causing compaction and things in the paddock. But there's also work being done in, say, blueberries, macadamias, I've heard, sometimes they use drones in almonds, maybe to assist with the pollination, perhaps. I'm not 100% sure, but yeah, there's some pretty cool stuff happening in tree crops.
Yeah, I know we're using a little bit of it. We have an 80-acre farm here on our campus, and we use a little bit of the drones to look for photosynthesis and see how much photosynthesis in terms of activity is going on, which can kind of lead to telling us how healthy the trees are. So that's really cool. And but ours is pretty limited in terms of what we get to do and what we get to see. So it's great to hear about how broad the programs and opportunities really are. Let's see. What else do I have here? I know I got another one here. I missed it. It was one about looking at areas that are inaccessible, and looking at how that can be like looking at farm crops and maybe land that's like less accessible. That question's from Andrew. It says, can drones be used to farm crops in less accessible areas like hills or mountains?
To a point, yeah. So I guess, they can use spray drones to, say where you can't get a self-propelled sprayer in, or even a person on a bike or a truck with like a spray thing on the back. You can use drones to spray, those really hilly country that's inaccessible. So they're using it for that. Even, because you can spread as well. So, essentially, if it was super duper hilly, you could spread out whatever seed that you wanted. This is, I guess, different to the environmental management stuff where they were shooting out those pods, but just, general, say, wheat seed. Let's just go wheat. It can actually be spread like that, and then, spread the fertilizer on and then spray the chemical. Just can't harvest with it yet, I guess. Yeah. But so it is, a lot of this technology has been developed in China and Japan, where they do have, those really hilly areas, that they're very terraced, and it just makes it a lot easier for them. And I guess we're just bringing it into how we use them here in Australia and the US. So I hope that answers his question. But if not, and I hope, I'm sure you guys will be all right. I'm happy to jump on afterwards and, answer a few questions in the comments later if needs be.
I got one other question from a student here. What are the risks involved with flying drones over crops and surrounding areas? And I guess that would include like populations of people and getting those things kind of overflying of those things.
Yeah, so I mean, just a general drone, I guess there always is a risk with any technology that, say, a rotor could go down and it falls out of the sky and hit somebody. It'd be pretty rare, but I guess when it comes to them during risk management, it's something they have to keep in mind, particularly if they are flying around populated areas. I guess part of the risk, from a spraying point of view, is that making sure if you're spraying that the rotors are pushing down that chemical or whatever into the crop, and that it doesn't drift elsewhere and affect other crops nearby, or if it's in a more urbanized kind of area, that doesn't drift in and affect people. But in saying that, they are actually using drones instead of manned aircraft, so whether it's a fixed wing air tractor or helicopters, because they can be more targeted. They really can get product in to areas that a plane will just go, no, like that's getting a bit too close to houses, I'm not going to do that. A drone can go in and do that. So I guess there always is risks, but it's about managing it. And from a spray point of view, making sure that your droplet sizes are really big, so they're heavy and they fall out of the sky, with the force of the rotors and push it down. So I hope that's kind of what they were talking about.
Yeah, no, I think so. I think that's good. And I think we had a fixed wing drone that we flew a while back, and the group that we had from their irrigation, were flying it, and it was actually manufactured in Oregon, which is about 12 hours north of where we are here, and something malfunctioned in it, and its home setting was Oregon, and all of a sudden the drone just turned and it took off, and it flew until it ran out of a battery. And it landed in a field, and they were able to go back and pick the drone up. But when I read Andrew's question, that was the first thing that came to my mind was that drone taking off, and it's like, where's it going? And its home setting was actually back in Oregon where it was manufactured. So.
Yeah, and I guess that is another thing. With say DJI drones, I mean, they have GPS built into them. So when they start up, they create that return to home point. So if you're flying around and something goes wrong, it'll actually come back and land where it took off 99% of the time. There will be that one time where it goes, nah, my last return to home point was 20 kilometers away and I'm going to try my hardest to get there. Like any technology, it's not perfect. You've always got to keep that in mind that, things could go wrong. And I guess with drones, they can go wrong in a really bad way. But for the most part, I was on a Clubhouse thing yesterday, and I think they said, 95% of drone crashes are actually pilot related. It might have even been higher than that. Very, very few are actually technology based. It's mostly due to the pilot. So, it's always a good idea to double, triple check what you're putting into the system before it all goes up in the air and does its thing. Yeah,
exactly. Well, I don't know if there's any more questions. I guess I do have one more question here in terms of, what drones are typically made of, the materials to keep them light and to keep them environmentally friendly and that sort of thing. And I think you mentioned where a lot of that technology is coming from. So maybe you could kind of hit that one more time.
Yeah, so I guess a lot of the development in the past has been in China. But there is a lot more development starting to happen in the US because of some of the restrictions about use of drones, say within your defense department. There is more development happening in your own country as well as countries like Switzerland. There's probably a little bit happening here in Australia. As for what they're made out of, plastic, but also carbon fibre because the strength and it doesn't weigh that much. I guess there's a bit of fiberglass out there, but I guess when, particularly fixed wing. I don't know what the fixed wing that you had, Troy, but fiberglass drones sometimes when they come down, they can kind of crack a bit if they have a bit of a funny landing. So they are trying to make them a little bit more resilient to when they're having to do belly landings and things like that. But I guess the other thing is just what a lot of the drones are powered by lithium ion batteries. So, I guess that is not necessarily sustainable in the long run. So I would imagine there's a lot of work happening, say, on hydrogen powered and hybrid powered. So hopefully, within the next 10 years that we'll see some really good technology come through for powering these drones and the length of time that we need to do some of this stuff within ag.
Well, excellent, Megan. We appreciate your time here today. It was great talking with you, getting to know you a little bit and know a little bit about what you do with Fly the Farm and a little bit about your operations down in Australia. So we really appreciate your time here today. Thank you so much for joining us. I guess one quick announcement is don't forget that April 7th is our next one. It's the Science of Art and Yoga. A human-monkey connection, and that will be great. Dr. Madden will be talking about that, and so we appreciate that as well in the near future. Elizabeth?
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thanks so much for the opportunity. Really appreciate it. Hope you understood my Australian slang. I didn't throw any crikeys or anything in there. So, but yeah, look, thanks. And I hope you all got something out of it. And yeah, like I said, don't hesitate to reach out if you have any further questions.
Have a great rest of your morning.
Thank you.
Have a great day.
Same to you all. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Bye.